Hotel brothers and sisters, and it's lovely to be sharing Francis Jeffers with the Griot organization. So Francis Jeffers, born in the island of Dominica, which is the native island in the Caribbean. Amazing childhood, very empowered childhood, an amazing family. My dad was a headmaster, a politician, a businessman, an educator, and so I grew up in a very empowered situation where pride in who you are as a person was important, and that quite clearly you were expected to present yourself in a certain way and position yourself for success, whatever that means to you. So like I said, my dad was one of my heroes. My other hero is Malcolm X, and growing up in Dominica as a young person, especially in my formative years, I entered high school around 10 and a half years old. At that time, I also read the autobiography of Malcolm X, which took me from a position of not seeing myself as an enslaved person, but a child of Africa, a person of African descent, a person for history that is strong, where it's centered on excellence, and that has been the cornerstone of my life and in terms of how I do and how I raise my children. So during the time of my youth, you had the civil rights movement in the United States. You had the quest for independence and statehood in the Caribbean. You had the liberation movements and independence of African states. So we're moving away from the disaster of where Africa was divided up and moving to a period where African people were looking forward to creating their own stories, reversing 700 years of history, and actually moving back to a position where our history is important. So that part of the struggle is still on, making sure that we are centered in who we are as African people. And it's very important right now when you look at the issues that is going wrong in North America. Also the period of COVID-19 and the history of what's going on in terms of the attacks on people of African descent. So this is a very poignant time in history. So I'm really happy to share my thoughts and my views with you. So in terms of my education is very interesting because it's been rooted in serving my community. I've been volunteering since I'm 17 when I came to Canada in the African Canadian community. In terms of education, primarily. So one of assisting children of Caribbean background in terms of the academic success. I had strong heroes like Eva Smith and other people who inspired me to contribute to other people my age and younger in terms of academic success. Then the opportunity to go to university, the University of Toronto. I did a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry with a minor in political science. And after I graduated, worked in the pharmaceutical industry, starting at Connaught Laboratories. Connaught, in terms of Canadian medical history, is a premier institute where a lot of Canadian innovation in terms of vaccines and other health-related innovations was created and developed. So I come from a very strong tradition of history of African people, but also a strong tradition of innovation in Canadian history. So one of the things I looked forward to was the ability to share that history coming from a strong pride in sense of Canadian innovation, a strong pride in African history, and how do I use my science and my history as an empowerment tool within the African Canadian community. So then therefore at that time there was less than maybe 5% of people of African descent who went into the sciences, and became my life goal of working to kind of change that dynamic. So I created an organization called Visions of Science Network for Learning, which was a network of science clubs across the Greater Toronto area, encouraging kids of African descent and kids of lower socioeconomic status to enjoy the area of STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, by having weekly experiments, learning about how they see science and seeing science as a tool for employment. Also in that, I got into the habit of making them see themselves in the science. So working with the kids where they get centered as an African person, but also centered in the African tradition of science and excellence, and also centered in the science, because I've combined the history of science of African people with the history of Canadians in science, and also working with the kids to understand what are the tools that they require to be successful in creating their own history as people of African descent in the science in the future in Canada, right? So it's looking at a very holistic view of science and empowerment, but where the science is in a situation where the young person sees themselves centered in the science, where representation matters of them in the science, right? And furthermore, as we've developed the Canadian Multicultural Inventors Museum, we work with other people of color and other Canadians, where they are at the center of the science that they're being part of. So therefore, in the Canadian Multicultural Inventors Museum, we look at the history of all peoples in science and innovation. So then therefore, when in our exhibits, which we create and take to schools and public arenas, this young person, the adult, learns about the history of their people in science and innovation. So they're part of a continuum. They're not a beginning, because for thousands of years, wherever they may be, from whatever background they are, they've been part of a history of creating science. And now it's how we continue to give young people the tools so that they can continue making inroads and creating their own footprint as Canadians in the areas of science and technology, engineering, and mathematics. But the fascinating thing, and which should be no surprise to anybody, is Africa was the cradle of civilization. So we had around 7 major ancient African civilizations. One of the preeminent civilizations was the ancient Egyptian civilization, which was started by the Nubian civilization. So when you look into the history of Nubian people in the area of what we call now as South Sudan, there was no aspect of science that we were not involved with. We had, when you go to the areas of Mali, to the great universities of Timbuktu, when we go into the greater Zimbabwean civilization, when we go down to Southern Africa and see the early tools that was created by African people in the South, when we go to Nigeria and that whole area of West Africa, and look at where we were smelting steel at 800 degrees Fahrenheit under the ground, where we had the empires, the Ashanti civilization, and its control of gold, where they were trading and being centers of knowledge. In ancient Egypt, for example, or what we call Kemet, to be a scholar, you had to have studied for over 40 years. We were the center of learning. People came from other countries. In Greece, they would be considered a scholar after 20 years of study, which was, again, we set the bar for excellence. When you look at the pyramids of ancient Egypt, we did not separate geometry from architecture, from science, from spirituality. So the number 7, which is an important number, and when you look at the geometry and the numerology of our pyramids, when you look at the information coming out of the pyramids, having the first written language, the written language of hieroglyphics. When we look at people like Imhotep, who was the world's first multi-genius, who was an engineer, an architect, a priest, an advisor to the pharaohs. We did not have silos in terms of our science. We did not separate silos. The issue of science and silos came later on by other peoples. So, as centers of excellence, we've always had centers of excellence within our history. And so, coming from that tradition, it is fundamental that people of African descent understand that a lot of the basics of mathematics, of medicine, sculpture, architecture was rooted in African civilizations. And so therefore our contributions to the formation of world civilizations, the fact that coming out of Africa, people traveled and moved into Europe and moved into Asia, and then moved into Oceania, what we call Oceania today. We brought forth humanity. Humanity came from us. You understand then that the last 700 years of oppression that we've gone through as African people is a small dot in the history of African people. Because over 60,000 years ago, people of Africa moved out into other areas of the world and brought forth civilization. So then therefore, although we have pains of going through the African Holocaust of slavery, our history is over 50 to 60,000 years old. As the Jamaicans would say, we ran things didn't run us, right? So then therefore, when we go back and to look at the strength and resilience of African people, it is based in fact, it's based in tradition, it's based in success, in terms of excellence, exploration, and all aspects of world development. So I mean, fundamentally, you need to learn about ancient Egypt. You need to learn about African history so that you fortify yourself. And it's like, so when we look at people like Sheikh Anta Diop, who was a great Congolese scholar, who was a multi-genius similar to Imhotep, he did work on showing that the ancient Egyptians were people of African descent coming out of the Nubian civilization. The works of Ivan van Sertima, who talked about ancient African science and how we came before Columbus. Chancho Williams, who looks at the destruction of African civilizations. We need to read learn about the great kingdoms of Mali, and but we also need to visit those places. We need to. It is imperative that all people of African descent visit the continent and go and explore and learn and meet people and learn about the history of African people, learn about the diversity of African heritage, so that they don't see themselves as one-dimensional. It kind of pains me when I see people seeing African people as just a homogeneous group. We are a product of different experiences coming out right to the continent of Africa. We have people of all backgrounds, of all hair types, phenotypes, etc., so that we understand the complexities of African people. I mean, they are. I just want to add that, just understand that we come from a people, from the first people. We come from a people with melanin, where melanin gives you is a source of energy. We come from a people where the sun is important to us. We come from people with history. We come from people with passion. We come from people of creativity. We dominate the world in terms of creativity, be it in the arts. We need to dominate in terms of the science. We are not one-dimensional. So the history is ours. This is our time, and we have to make sure that we ensure that our kids understand that this is their time. It's not a time for sorrow. It's a time for strength. But looking forward.